What's up guys, Houndish here, and today we're jumping in with some Destiny 2 and Bungie news. And as expected today, the overwhelmingly negative news continues to roll out, as we get even more detail about what's going on at Bungie, the recent staff layoffs, and some more of the reasoning for that behind the scenes is becoming clear. But also sentiment around the issue and anger in the community continues to grow. Especially Pete Parsons, the Bungie CEO, is getting a lot of heat as even more negative press comes out, missed revenue targets at Bungie, comments from executives and leadership. And yeah, things continue to not look any better. On top of that, we still don't have official word from Bungie about any of the delays that have been rumored. So we find ourselves in a pretty weird situation. Honestly, it's pretty exhausting seeing more of this stuff come out, but that is the news for the moment. So we'll cover it in a video as always. I hope you find this one interesting at least. Share thoughts you have on anything we touch on down in the comment section. And now let's get into it. And first up, probably not the initial priority for some players, but we did get an update to Destiny 2 yesterday. Eventually, there were patch notes drop for that. And so for those who want to know, for activities in the Crucible, they fixed an issue where players who reached an Ascendant ranking competitive were unable to claim the Adept Guardian Spec Triumph. On top of that, for Player Journey, it now allows players to access the Plunge dive tank to complete the Season of the Witch quests if they've not completed the Season of Deep quests. Then for Armor and Expressions, they fixed an issue where 2 Festival of the Lost Universal Ornament sets were not animating correctly in inspection screens. Another issue where the worm in the Wiggle Worm emote would disappear partway through the emote, but they say as well they fixed an issue where Lord of Wolves was dealing too much damage at range when aiming down sights. And they fixed an Icarus Dash issue where the description string was missing additional functionality added in a recent update. And lastly, in general, they've removed the following items from sale in Eververse, and that's the Lycan's Maya Shell, Winchester's Ruined Sparrow, and Boo emote. And I believe that's because they're part of a Prime bundle this month. So a minor update, but a couple of things there. And that's about the only remotely normal piece of news that we have for today. Otherwise, there have been a series of new reports about what's going on at Bungie. And so from Jason Schreier at Bloomberg here, there was a new article titled Sony's Bungie game unit cut 8% of staff after Destiny play wilted. And the highlights include that sales at the studio were running 45% below projections for the year, and that layoffs are part of a bigger revamp at Sony's PlayStation unit. And so according to the article, Bungie's decision to cut an estimated 100 jobs from its staff of around 1,200 followed dire management warnings earlier in the month of October of a sharp drop in the popularity of the flagship video game Destiny 2. And it says just a couple of weeks ago, executives at Bungie told employees that revenue was running 45% below projections for the year, according to people who attended that meeting. And so that in itself is pretty significant, 45% below what they expected to see. Of course, that is based on Bungie's projections, so it isn't necessarily a direct comparison to a previous year, but there are a few things here. Obviously, Witch Queen was a very high-performing expansion. Lightfall also got a lot of pre-orders, and of course in the time since Lightfall, which had at best a lukewarm reception, it's easy to imagine that revenues have dropped across things like purchasing seasons, but also Eververse and microtransactions. We should also remember that these projections quite possibly come from before the Sony deal, and Bungie may have been looking at the higher end of that potential projection in order to report to Sony and to try and get a contract with them, right? But back to the article, apparently the Final Shape expansion was getting good, but not great feedback, and I assume that was through playtesting at Bungie, and management had told those present in meetings that they planned to push back the release to June 2024 from February. But in the meantime, Pete Parsons told staff that Bungie would be cutting costs, such as for travel, as well as implementing salary and hiring freezes. And it said that everyone would have to work together to weather the storm, but then further down the road on Monday of this week, of course dozens of folks started being laid off, and staff woke up to mysterious 15-minute meetings that had been planned on their calendars, which turned out to be part of the announcement of that mass layoff. And Bloomberg have said that they've laid off around 8% of their employees. The article also indicates that there was pressure from Sony to manage spending in the company, but it does appear that ultimately it was Bungie's decision to manage it in this way, right? They're the ones who actually decided to lay staff off as opposed to try and make savings or revenue improvements in other areas. But the bad press continues. Even IGN got some exclusive cuts. And according to them, at an internal meeting after the layoffs had occurred, Pete Parsons told the remaining employees that the company had kept the right people to continue working on Destiny 2. And he once again said to staff that layoffs were largely due to the underperformance of Destiny 2 over the last year, as well as lower than expected pre-orders for the the upcoming expansion Final Shape. And so in terms of speaking with your wallet, which is something that's been said a lot of times in this community, it would appear actually that has had quite an impact over the last year. But employees at Bungie have also said that the issue of low player sentiment had been flagged to leadership repeatedly for months prior to the layoffs, and that employees had also begged for necessary changes in order to win players back. And essentially they must have been asking for resources in order to improve the game. But it also talks about the fact that Bungie employees were repeatedly assured following the Sony acquisition that there wouldn't be layoffs. And employees have also reportedly felt very angry and frustrated at the fact that Bungie completed work on a brand new headquarters, which of course they have spent millions on. But another component of this is that reportedly job losses had actually started at Bungie many weeks back, especially in the QA team, which is primarily focused on testing. And the exact number isn't known, but the departures over the past few weeks were notable enough that the company's head of QA had to send an email around to staff members addressing the situation, and they claimed that the job losses weren't layoffs and weren't the result of cost cutting in any way. But of course, that has turned out not to be true as this situation has developed. And so there are so many things to sort of consider here. Firstly, that 45% miss in revenue targets for the year. Again, it's safe to say that players have voted with their wallet and indicates the massive financial impact that Lightfall has had on the game. But also it's clear that folks at Bungie were very aware that the game needed to be improved, and upon reporting that to higher-ups, there was pretty much inaction over the course of the last year, focused on improving the game. And now that Bungie have ultimately reached this point where they're concerned enough to push back the Final Shape expansion, one of the choices that has been made at the top level in order to manage those losses is actually to fire staff, which seems completely counterproductive at a time where Bungie are delaying an expansion in order to try and improve it enough that they can re-engage players. And as I said yesterday, I think people like Pete Parsons have got a lot to answer for. And this level of executive ignorance at Bungie has been apparent for a very long period of time, but what we're hearing here is a perfect example of it. And instead of putting more resources in at a time where the game really needs it, Bungie are not only taking resources away by laying staff off, but they're also amping up the expectation on the remainder of the team to significantly improve the next product in the form of the Final Shape. So that in itself is an absolute fiasco, and it demonstrates just how mismanaged Bungie has been for a very long time. We also have to keep in mind that this isn't really the responsibility of the average developer at Bungie. As those reports have indicated, there were a lot of folks who were seriously concerned about the game and were trying to get that addressed over the past year. And on top of what seems to be a terrible business approach at Bungie, obviously, they've both brutally dismissed a handful of staff, and the folks who've tried to make Destiny 2 work have been left out to dry. But also the way that this has been handled, even if you were to have layoffs at a company, I'm not justifying that by any means, but the communication around it was absolutely shot, and has also become a PR crisis for Bungie at the moment, where there's a ton of bad press coming out. Bungie initiated these layoffs without really communicating to staff. They also don't appear to have a plan to communicate to the players of the game, and we're hearing about a delay that Bungie still haven't announced. You can go onto bungie.net right now and pre-order the Final Shape, which is launching in February, at least according to their webpage, but based on what we're hearing, that isn't true. And so still that needs to be confirmed by Bungie, but the nature of the situation, the way it's been handled, is absolutely mind-blowing. And I'd say as well, it also indicates that a lot of very talented people, many of those same people who've been let go in the past week, have actually been carrying Destiny despite the management being absolutely dreadful. And so for today, that is the news. That's the new info that we've got. Like I said, it's just exhausting to continue to just see this terrible news about the game, but also it's mind-blowing that Bungie have still had nothing to say on the issue. We don't know if we're going to get This Week in Destiny, we don't know if we're going to get a blog post, an official announcement of the delay. Literally everything is up in the air. The one positive that some folks may take from this, in terms of the game itself, separate to all of the terrible things that have been going on inside of the studio, is that Final Shape is essentially being delayed to improve the product. That was something I didn't anticipate to be the case. The reports we've had today indicate that that is a possibility. I think there still could be more going on between Sony and Bungie and other kind of financial reasons that Final Shape is being pushed back the way it is. But that's stuff that we will potentially just never know about. Either way, Bungie need to get out, get some public control of the situation, and actually tell the player base what's going on with that expansion and the remainder of the game. Because until that happens, while again it is not a justification for the way that Bungie higher-ups have handled this situation, but in terms of PR, things can only get worse before they get better, and the longer that Bungie take to have any kind of conversation about it, the worse that situation will be. Guys, for today, those are the updates we have. Once again, if we get info from Bungie, I'll keep you posted. But share any thoughts you have down below. Big shout out to all of the Bungie developers who are going through this right now. It's unfortunate that your leadership haven't done a better job, and that's both to current and former Bungie employees at this point. And the last thing I'll say, I seriously don't expect it to happen, but people like Pete Parsons, and clearly other higher-ups at Bungie and the way that they've handled stuff, there are some people who need to be off. Let's be real. I seriously feel like there should be some resignations over this, but we will see how things develop, and I'll be sure to keep you guys posted.